Hey guys, welcome back to another video in my hair studies series. And so this one is actually one of the most requested hair colours I get asked to do a tutorial on over the past however many months. And that is sort of white, platinum, very light blonde hair. Hair that is so light that it's basically not got much different tones in it, not got loads of heavy shadows, so it can be difficult to make it look three-dimensional and realistic, being that it is such a light hair colour. So today I'm going to be giving my tips on how you can draw realistic looking white hair. But just before we start, if you guys do want to learn even more about getting super realistic portraits in coloured pencils, then make sure you check out my new course, which is on how to basically use all of my techniques that I do to create super realistic portraits. So you guys can get 15% off by using the code SAVE15 at checkout. So check out the top of the description, there is a link where you can go check out the course trailer, see exactly what's included in the course, and you can buy it from there as well. But anyway guys, let's get into the tutorial. If you guys want to see the real time for this hair tutorial as well as these 4 other hairstyles, then check out my Patreon. They are all available in real time with voiceover. So the colours that I'm using for this is the Buff Titanium, the Raw Umber 10%, the French Grey 10%, and also just the French Grey, the darker grey. I'm also going to be using a silver grey, and I will be using a steel grey as well. But these are all Caran d'Ache Luminance colour pencils, but you can use any colour pencils that you have. And so the first thing that I'm doing is I'm taking the Raw Umber 10% and I'm applying this as a base layer to those shadowed areas. I'm also using a Tombow Mono eraser occasionally to erase my pencil outlines, because when you're drawing white hair, you don't want any of your pencil strokes to show through. Because it's white, the hair is so light that any really light pencil lines that you created for your sketch will show through. So that's why I go through and start to erase them as I draw. So once I've added the first layer of the Raw Umber 10%, I also go over it with the silver grey. I kind of use those two colours as a base layer, so the Raw Umber 10% and the silver grey, which is that really light silvery grey. And then I also use the French Grey 10% to build up some more of those shadows, more of those subtle shadows. And I like to use the French Grey, so the darker grey, for the shadowed areas. And also I go over it with the steel grey, which is a bit darker than the silver grey. And so the steel grey is great for the shadows as well as keeping that bluish tone to the grey hair. So I am drawing a short wavy hairstyle for this tutorial, and so I just go through it section at a time and repeat the same process with the same colours just over and over again, building up the shadows and the basic structure to the hair. It's going to look quite uniformed once I do all of the sections, but then we'll break it up by adding a few flyaway hairs. So like I said, I go through it by first applying the Raw Umber and the silver grey. The silver grey is really good at getting that shadow tone in that's really subtle, not too strong and too dark. And what I find the common mistake people make when they're drawing white hair is that they do it too light, and so they don't include a lot of grey tones for the shadows. And even though it is white hair that you're drawing, there is still a lot of shadow in there and a lot of grey tone in there. And so to make your white hair look three-dimensional, you really need to study your reference image for those really subtle shadows. They might be really subtle, even more subtle than this, but they will be there. It just won't be completely white all over. There's going to be some sort of shadow in there and different tones. It might not be completely white, it might have a slight blue cast to it or a slight more yellow browny tone to it. So you have to study your reference and look for those subtle differences, because it's not going to be really in your face, these changes, these grey tones. It will be subtle because the hair colour is so light. And so I like to use the steel grey and the silver grey to give like that bluish tone to some of the bits of hair, but I also like that Raw Umber because the reference that I was using had bits of both. It was slightly had that brownish tone to it, but I didn't want to make it too yellowy, too brown, so I did want to add some of that silver grey and that steel grey in there as well. And so you don't have to use these colours, but I do recommend using some greys, but don't just do greys, add some other base colours like that more blue tone or that more yellowy brown earthy raw umber tone, just to make it look a bit more realistic, because even white hair, it does have that subtle bit of hue to it, and so it's really important to determine what that is and to pick the suitable colours for that. And so you can see I am building it up section at a time, and I'm really following the direction that the hair's going in. You can see that my lines are nice curves that curve with the shape of that section. And I think that's even more important when you're drawing curly hair, to do it section at a time. So I do the different curls. I like focus on one curl at a time and render that. And so the stages that I sort of go through is I first look at where the main shadows are in that section of hair that I'm drawing. So I identify where the shadows are, and that normally helps indicate the look of the curve and give it that curved shape if you get the shadows in the right place. And so you can see that I build up that structure of the sections by using a base layer of raw umber 10% to block in the shadows. I do it very lightly, and that's one thing that you guys need to remember, is that you don't want to press really hard on your pencils really early on, because you might want to layer some different colours over the top. I also use the buff titanium and even a bit of white to actually smooth out some of these colours, to merge them together, to blend them a bit. I just went over it with the white pencil or the buff titanium in slightly darker areas, and just kind of merged and blended all of these different layers together so that it wasn't so harsh with the lines, so it looks a bit softer. So you can include some really light areas in the hair. It doesn't have to all be grey. So the lightest parts of your hairstyle is going to be the highlighted areas. So this tends to be in like the centre of that lock of hair, in the middle. It tends to be the most highlighted there, and you can see that that's the lightest areas on my hairstyle. I'm not applying any of the shadowed colours towards the middle. I'm fading into those areas by transitioning out of those darker colours at stagnated points, so that it creates a really soft and subtle transition from those shadows into those highlights. But you can see I've not applied loads of colour on the centre of each section of hair. It's quite light, and that is because it is white hair, so the highlighted areas are going to be quite white, not much colour added to them, and so I tend to leave them quite white and just go over with the white pencil to blend some of those colours to fade up into that, so it's not just shadowed colours straight to the white. I do want to make it as soft of a transition as possible, and that's the same with any hairstyle, any hair colour that you're doing. You don't want to have really obvious stop-start points between your shadows and your highlights. So you can see now I'm doing the thing with the white pencil where I'm blending everything together, and you can see that it's slightly softening it out. And now it looked quite uniform, so I went in with my Tombow Mono Eraser, and what I'm using that for is to actually, as you can see, lift up some of the colour pencil and create flyaway different clumps of hair, and also just lighten up any areas that I think have got a bit too dark or I just want to make a bit brighter. And so the Tombow Mono Eraser is really great to use with your coloured pencils. I think it works really, really well. And as you can see, it's just nicely created that soft look to this hairstyle by breaking up all of those uniform shapes, by adding some soft flyaway hairs over the top. It adds that top layer, another sort of layer which gives it more depth. And that's another thing that you need to remember. When you're drawing hair, you want it to look like it has depth, like it's in layers. So you need to look at how the sections of hair overlap over each other. And that again helps to make a realistic look with the shadows, because when it's in layers, you'll be having more shadow on those deeper layers of hair, because the layers on top will be casting shadow onto those underneath layers, and they won't be getting as much light. So once I've added those few little bits of flyaway hairs with the Tombow Mono Eraser, I look at the reference, I look at the contrast, and I see if there's anything else that I want to tweak, and that's normally adding a few darker shadows. But you don't want to go overboard. Some people go the opposite way and they do too much dark shading to a point where it looks not that beautiful white platinum look. It starts to look really grey and dark. So you don't want to overdo it with your grey colours, and if you do and you need to lighten it up, just go over it with a layer of the white pencil to lighten it up. It's not that big of a deal. You can normally kind of change it if you make a mistake. It's not set in stone. You can do things to fix it, but try to keep to these lighter versions of grey so that you won't go really dark. So the darkest grey I have is the French grey, but even that I'm just using on the darkest parts. I'm normally using the French grey 10% for the shadows and most of the mid-toned areas, not really the French grey, that's just for the darkest areas. I'm just going back in now with the Tombow Mono Eraser just to add a final few sort of flyaway hairs, and mainly I'm brightening up each of those sections. You can see that I'm really lifting some of that colour to give more sort of section bits of hair within the main section, so to break up each section into smaller parts. But anyway guys, I hope you found that tutorial useful. If you did, make sure to check out my course, which is on creating realistic portraits, so check out the link in the description for that, and also the real time is on Patreon. Anyway guys, that is it for this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future videos, so drawing topics and tutorials as well. But that is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.